Now, you've all heard in recovery that the number one treatment for sex and addiction or compulsive sexual behavior, right, affairs, chronic infidelity, chronic cheating, is peer support and connection. It's the number one treatment. Now, I want to talk about this because a lot of guys either A, aren't using the groups that they're in the most beneficial way to truly maximize the recovery, or B, even worse, they're not connecting at their group, which is a big problem because it's connection that is the opposite of addiction, right? You've heard the quote, right? The opposite of addiction is connection, not sobriety, right? So it's connection. But again, connection is more than just going to a place where people are. If that was connection, then the grocery store would count, work would count, church would count, right? But again, that's not the type of connection that we're talking about. So in this episode, I just kind of want to talk about how to utilize a peer support group, a recovery group to its fullest potential so that you are actually getting the connection, the accountability, and the interaction that you need to truly recover. I hate saying this because it ruffles a lot of feathers, but I'm sorry. The majority of guys are not in good recovery. And I think it's why we see the relapse rate so high when it comes to sex and porn addiction. I don't think it's because these guys are lazy. I don't think it's because these guys aren't doing the work. I think it's because they're just simply not in good recovery. And it's not because they don't want to be. It's because they just don't know how to be. So I'm hoping to kind of use this episode to teach you how can you be leaning on your peer support group? What should you be doing for them? What should they be doing for you? First, I want to hit on the obvious ones, right? Peer support and connection. Okay, so I just want to clear that up real quick to make sure you genuinely are getting peer support and you're genuinely getting connection. Then from there, the rest of the episode, I'll talk about really how to use the group and how to get the most out of it. So it's peer support. Now, I want to really emphasize peer support. This person needs to be considered your peer. You need to feel like this person knows what it's like to be you, right? There's some relatability, there's some common interests. You guys have, you can relate to one another and your life and your addiction. I think one of the biggest challenges within the sex addiction space, because this is a process addiction, every guy in the room has kind of a different addiction and a different compulsivity. And so if you can't really relate to the other gentleman in the room, is that truly peer support? I would say no. Right? If your brain, your body just doesn't sense that this is a peer, they just, they're just using words and speaking about things where it's like, yeah, this person just doesn't understand. They don't understand my addiction. They don't understand what it's like to be me and live in my world, right? And I see this a lot with my guys. It's why we have my program, The Successful Addict, is for a lot of high achieving and driven entrepreneurs. A lot of their addiction isn't necessarily this pornography and fantasy-based escapism, right? They're not really using and porn as an escape or a drug. They're using it more of a means to get attention, get validation, enhance. And so if they're talking to somebody who's really using it as an escapist, right? They're looking at every day, every other day. It's like a drug for them to kind of unplug and get away from unpleasant emotions. Whereas, a lot of outgoing, confident entrepreneurs, it's not necessarily a way to escape. A lot of them really love their life. They're really using it as a tool, a way to enhance their life, a way to get a feeling that they want to feel, right? So, having these two people in the same room, there might not be this peer connection that happens because both of them are kind of struggling from a different type of compulsivity. And then the second piece to this is connection. Are you actually connecting with the other guys, right? And again, connection is not just being in a room with other people. It's not even just being in a room with other sex addicts. Again, that doesn't count. You just being there. You could even be sharing vulnerably, and that's not connection. Connection is an exchange. It's an exchange between two people. It's where this other person genuinely feel like they know what it's like to be you, and they're hurting. They're just imagining like, oh my gosh, I can relate to this guy's story so much. I feel so bad for him. I want to help him, right? There's this exchange of relatability, like I said, common interests, a similar drive, a similar kind of goals and aspirations for your life. That's what really bonds two people together. It's like, man, I feel like I'm looking in the mirror. And that's a special feeling. And that, to me, the more of those people you can get in your life, the more recovered you'll be. I mean, simply, I asked this question to my recovery groups before I recorded this podcast episode. And I said, guys, what do you think is good recovery, right? I kind of listened to everybody's description of it. And the number one thing that every single person said was real, true, deep meaningful connections with other guys in their recovery group. That will get you sober. That will keep you in long-term good recovery. And I agree. It was finally when I found my tribe of men to support me in my recovery. That was when, sobriety and recovery just started getting so much easier, so much more fun. I really started seeing, what? There's a world where, I'm not going to relapse. There's a world where I can actually get these behaviors out of my life for good, right? But it was that deep connections with the support group that really started unlocking that aspect of my brain. There's science to back that, but we won't get into that on this episode. So how do you use a recovery group, and what should you be doing with them, and what should they be doing for you? So the biggest thing that should be present in a recovery group is, first and foremost, all the guys need to know what their own process addiction is, and they need to be able to explain it to the other guys in the group. Really, if everybody is going to kind of mastermind and collaborate around how they can help all of us overcome our addictions or compulsive behavior, they really need to understand what drives it in the first place. So, and I'm talking like really, really, really granular. Like, what's the worldview? What's your sense of self and identity that really birthed a lot of these behaviors? And I'm talking very, very, very granular, right? You need to understand that. You need to explain this to the other guys, because again, if they're going to help you change these beliefs, they're going to help you change your self-concept. They really need to understand it in pretty good detail. So I would say that's number one. To me, if you don't know what the details of your specific process addiction are, and you can't explain that to your guys in your recovery group or even your therapist, I don't even know if you're in good recovery, right? Because again, how do you know you're changing the things that caused you to act out if you don't know what caused you to act out? Okay. So I think that's number one. And so then that leads me to number two, which piggybacks off number one, which is in a peer support group, a good support group. I don't even call mine peer support. I call mine recovery groups. If you're really trying to change these brain patterns for long-term recovery, long-term sobriety, you guys should be talking 90% plus of the time around what those problematic beliefs and brain processes are, and calling them out and having other people call them out, right? What will happen is, as months go on, the other guys in the group will start to figure you out. They'll start to get to know your process addiction, the things that your brain has kind of latched on to, some in your adulthood, some reading all the way back from childhood. But it's that understanding of what your brain is after that helps them help you change. Okay. But again, that all hinges on everybody knowing what their process addiction is and then presenting it to the other guys. In our groups, we have these booklets basically that we fill out over time, and we essentially kind of map out your process addiction, and then you're sharing that again with your wife and with your recovery group, right? And ideally with your therapist as well, right? So everyone's kind of honed in on a very specific plan. And for those of you who are married and you're trying to regain trust, there's a lot of conversations. How do we regain trust, right? How do your wife knows that you're a cheater, that you're a liar, right? So how do we convince her brain that you're not that anymore? And, it's not sobriety that's going to give her the safety, right? It's really not. Like, you just stopping this stuff, again, she's still waiting for the other shoe to drop, right? She's still waiting for you to relapse and lie to her again. So where's the safety? The safety is in exactly what we just said. The safety is in showing her, hey, this is my process addiction. This is what led to me acting out. And here's the proven psychological strategies and the techniques and methods that I can use to change these brain patterns, right? That's very critical. I would say it's the most critical piece to recovery, to good recovery. So then what can you be doing with your group? You're now calling yourself out anytime you see these brain processes come up. Here's the thing. Most of these compulsive processes are actually not going to be sexual, right? So we'll use attention, for example, your desire for attention, admiration, and validation, most of the time, I would say 99% of the time, it's actually not going to be sexual. My guess is you're actually going to do it through impressing other guys at work, your boss, your superiors, the people who you manage. You're going to be trying to showcase how awesome you are so that you are getting compliments, validated, and people are respecting you and admiring you, right? So yes, sometimes you used women to do that. But the truth is, the vast majority of the time, you used money, your career, your appearance, buying material things, right? So again, but that's the thing about process addiction is, yes, sometimes it happens sexually, but most of the time it didn't. And I believe that's why guys relapse is they're just fixing the sexual pieces, but they're not actually fixing these problematic brain processes where they're finding their self-worth and their value through, again, attention, admiration, validation. If that's your particular process addiction, that needs to be fixed. Otherwise, to me, it's just a matter of time until you'll relapse. relapse again. That's what you're doing with your group. You're feeding them constantly. Hey guys, I noticed this. I noticed that I went to this meeting. I didn't have my Rolex on, so I had to go back home to put my Rolex on so that I could impress all the guys in the room, right? It's just calling out these kind of compulsive behaviors that led to the problem in the first place, right? So then what should your group be doing back to you? Your group should be taking an interest in your process addiction. And your group should be trying really, really hard to sell your brain on a superior strategy of getting the same thing, but not harming yourself, your wife, or violating your integrity, right? So that's really what the group's doing. They're trying to help you become resourceful because, again, your brain wants what the brain wants. And so we have to sell the brain on something different. Otherwise, it's still going to prefer acting out as its preferred choice, right? And that's why the people talk about white knuckling this. You can't just avoid the sexual stuff and expect it to go away. That's not how it works, right? We have to truly change the perceived value so the brain no longer wants it. Like that's really what you have to do. Otherwise, here's going to be white knuckling recovery for the rest of your life. So what other things should you be doing? So that's the number one, right? You should be telling and educating the men in your report groups about your process addiction, and they should be working back towards you on helping understand, but yes, ultimately change the faulty processes. But what other things they should they do? Well, they should be holding you accountable, right? So as you're kind of telling them some of your goals, and your facilitator in your group should be asking you for this, right? So you should have objectives, right? Your recovery should have a clear plan, right? You should know exactly what it is that you're working on, what you need to do, and what you can't do on your own, right? So then your group comes in and they're helping hold you accountable, right? You're telling them about the things that are going to be hard for you. You're telling them, hey guys, I know I need to accomplish this, but I don't know how. What kind of advice do you guys have, right? So they're helping you become resourceful because again, just not doing anything and hoping it to go away, that's not a plan. Right. So your group should be constantly testing your plan for effectiveness and speed. Right. We can't hurry recovery, but we can certainly speed it up and you can certainly slow it down. Right. So the goal of your peer support group and the facilitator should be, is your plan the best plan possible? And are you moving along and as fast as possible? And that's where I say a lot of guys just aren't in great recovery because I don't think they have a great plan. I certainly don't believe that they're moving along at as fast as possible. And if your wife sees that, she's going to be pissed. She is. She's going to be pissed and it's going to be a huge hit to the trust. So what else should you guys be doing? Well, you guys should be meeting up in person. In our groups, we meet up in person 2 times a year. And, for the 4 days we're together, 30 hours are spent on deep, intense recovery work, really intense, vulnerable conversations of digging back to the root of all this, right? And then outside of that, you guys do need to have fun. This is really hard for the betrayed partners and the wives to hear this because, they don't want you to have fun, right? They're pissed, right? They don't want recovery to be fun, but it does need to be fun. When recovery becomes boring and monotonous, that's just not great, right? And your wives, as much as they want you to feel them as much pain as they're feeling, I bet you deep down, they want you to be in good recovery. And part of good recovery is that you're enjoying it. You enjoy your recovery groups. You're looking forward to it. The guys in my groups really do. They count down the days to the next intensive. They just love spending that time together and, being introspective and doing the deep work. And of course, yeah, having some fun, sharing meals together. Because again, what's the number one treatment for addiction? Connection. Where's connection happen? It's tough to happen over Zoom. It just is. It's tough to happen over text, right? Technology is great, but in the end, we need to be meeting in person a couple times a year to really foster these relationships. So your peer support group should be doing that. There needs to be some sort of daily accountability plan of some kind. We use an app that keeps the guys all in touch every day. And so again, that's important, right? Because we're trying to remind the brain, hey, I have a group here. I got people who care about me. And that's really critical, especially when it comes to kind of silencing the addictive patterns and the unwanted patterns is that connection that's nonstop, right? Again, meeting once a week, a lot of bad stuff can happen in a week. A guy can totally relapse in a week, right? So what is your group doing daily to help stay on track and keep you guys connected? And then the last thing, and this one's, to me, it's really important. There needs to be this commonality and this tribal kind of brotherhood within the group. To me, if it's just a group of guys that you don't really respect, admire, I'm curious how effective that's actually going to be. To me, when you have a tribe, really like a recovery tribe of men that you enjoy being around, you look up to these guys, you admire these guys, you look forward to every meeting, right? To me, that's what a tribe is. And I think every guy in good recovery, their group needs to feel like a tribe. I mean, these need to be your ride or die guys that you're probably going to be friends with for the rest of your life. And that's so critical. That's connection. So in a nutshell, in conclusion, if you think you're in good recovery and you don't have a group like what I just described, I'm sorry, you're not in good recovery. You're not. And if your wife is kind of accusing you of not being in good recovery, a lot of this stuff is probably what she's referring to, right? She'll look at you and she'll be like, hey, nothing happened today. You didn't do anything, and, one argument might be, well, what am I supposed to do every single day, right? I could hear that. But again, you should be engaging in some capacity with your recovery group. But it doesn't have to be, or it doesn't have to be hours and hours and hours, but there should be these touch bases where you can at any given moment be able to call yourself out and communicate with your group and bring, something, current that day to them about recovery. And if you don't have anything, then they should be telling you and you can comment back on one of them. But the point is, I do take the betrayed partner side with this. To me, there should be some level of recovery, sobriety practice that's occurring every single day. I do. I think the mind can wander if we don't have a daily practice. But again, this is what a good recovery group is, right? You're digging into the brain processes, you're trying to change them. It's not just shares. Sharing's fine, but again, what I found when I went to meetings and all we ever did was shares was, I don't know. I mean, there wasn't really that much connection that happened because everybody just kind of shared for 5 minutes and the meeting was over. And then also, I don't know, I was kind of just as much of an addict at the end of the call as I was at the beginning of the call. We didn't really do anything to change, and there wasn't necessarily any sort of profound connection that happened in the room either, right? And so all I'm asking is that does your group honor what we know about what needs to be done, right? Connection, relatability. Are you looking forward to recovery? Do they know how to help you? Do you know how to help yourself, right? Is this a recovery tribe that's keeping you on track and making sure that your recovery is efficient and as fast as possible? Or are you just walking into the room to check off the box? Because again, that's not connection. And I certainly wouldn't say that classifies as a good peer support group or a recovery group. Because remember, this is process addiction. And you need to know what those processes are and you need to change them. If you're not changing your process addiction, relapse is imminent.